know I look young, but I'm actually 31, so there was a lot of time in between. And I'm really excited to share my journey with food and how we hit this massive milestone that allowed me to actually eat meat again. So my journey with food started when I was quite young. The main reason that I started experimenting with my diet was I started reading a lot about sustainability. I don't know what statistic I read, but something latched on and was something that was stuck quite deeply to my core. It was statistics about farming and a statistic about specifically animal farming and what that meant for the environment. So I started this journey by stopping eating beef in particular. It wasn't an easy journey, and I think a lot of people actually know that. But my family eats a lot of meat and they still eat meat. My brother actually says I was the queen of biltong. I've shaken that title, I promise. But I still actually enjoyed the taste of meat when I stopped eating it, and I still enjoyed everything about it. It was just that from the environmental aspect, it was very difficult to continue eating it knowing what I knew. I know for other people that that's the same, except sometimes it's harder to actually make the change. So in my family of meat-eating people, me wanting to eat only veggies was very difficult. I think my dad to this day still says he can only get his protein from animal protein. And I think that's a lot for a lot of people. Meat is very cultural and very ingrained in society and social aspects. And so my journey with food kind of went from home, where it was a bit tough and people didn't understand it. They really thought it was a fad for a while. They really tried, though, just to be clear. To university, where I went to res, where I still couldn't control what I ate. So I had a lot of toast with peanut butter, as a lot of people I think are familiar with. And, kind of went on that journey still, but, socially it is very, very difficult. My career, as Nicola mentioned, was as a management consultant, and that took me all over the world. I worked across Africa, Europe, as well as India. And that allowed me an opportunity to really understand, food and culture, and also how consumers behave towards that, and alternatives as well. So my journey through Africa really was, from very varied, from Ethiopia, where there's a ton of options, injera and all these wonderful plant-based options, to Nigeria, where socially, meat is very still cultural. I couldn't eat suya, which was very, very, important for my team to be able to showcase what food there was in Nigeria. To Mauritania, where despite some social issues related to the country, my team was very concerned about me going to work on a mine for 4 months and probably not having anything to eat. The mine was run by a French company, so they made amazing bread, but they also did try very hard with vegetables. Probably had the worst meal of my life one day. I don't know if you've ever had boiled onion and green peppers, but that was a meal I was served. They were pretty proud of it, so I did try and eat some of it, but it was definitely a very, very difficult meal to eat. And that really was a very important learning for me, for people that actually want to make a change, who are working on mines, having a very hard job. There aren't choices for people. My experience in India was also really amazing. I think somewhat the opposite. Vegetarian is the norm, and everything else on the menu that's not vegetarian is actually labeled as non-veg. So it really puts, a spin on the conventional, which is very, very interesting to see. I mean, you are seeing more Indians actually eating more non-veg as well, but that's in itself is a whole different story. And then moving to Europe, which was actually a tipping point for me and my food journey, was really, really exciting. I lived in Finland for a while, and the variety of alternatives that were there were amazing. It meant that socially it was not as difficult. Socially it was actually very easy, because from a price point perspective and from an option perspective, it made everything easier for everyone else even that I was hanging out with. Most of my friends were not plant-based, and so when they invited me over, they at least knew that they could provide something that was similar and tasty as well. And so working and living in Europe was, as I say, the tipping point for me to kind of make that change. I think working in a corporate where as I say, I worked on mines and I worked in telecoms and all these things, which they were important at the time, but really didn't resonate with who I was and the journey that I was on. I really decided to make that leap. I'd really learned a lot about all these alternatives and what they were doing, and then seen firsthand how they actually shaped people's behaviors, and really just got very excited about the opportunity of doing that. I think there was still, when I look at the plant-based alternatives, which I eat a lot, maybe too much, there's still a limit to how much that actually shifts people entirely. There's a limit because people think it's maybe highly processed, or there's a limit because it's still not as socially acceptable, and especially in South Africa, the price point isn't right. It's seen as something that's probably only for a select group of people. And I know people mentioned other options, like people are starting to make plant-based more equitable for people, and there's ways to do it cheaply, but for the average person, they still don't see that. And so for me, I started looking at what would this mean and what are the options for me. I got very excited about, the plant-based movement, but then other technology as well, precision fermentation and cultivated meat. And I think the thing with cultivated meat was it was the same thing, just made differently. And I think for the average consumer, and if we want to actually hit mass consumers to make these change, you need to provide them the same thing at the right price point, but the exact same thing that they're used to. And so for me, it was very exciting to be able to work in the cultivated meat space. And for those who don't know what cultivated meat is, as I said, same thing, just made different. And in terms of the process, you take a biopsy from an animal and you do it in the most harmless way possible. The biopsies that we've taken, the animals are back up and running within an hour, and they're a very small biopsy. And you take those cells and you grow them up in a lab environment, but you're essentially replicating the same process was inside the animal's body, just outside of the animal's body. So when they're in the lab, they're given amino acids and sugars and everything else that your body needs to thrive at a specific temperature. So at 37, if it's mammalian cells, 37 degrees. And thereafter, there's a few other things that happen to grow them. To grow a lot of them, you kind of put them in a cultivator, and that looks the same as what you would see in a brewery, so a kind of steel vat. And to provide some of that structure, we're cultivating fat and muscle at the moment. Some of it doesn't necessarily have all the structure of meat. You would use a scaffold. And that's basically the basic process that you would go through. In terms of where the industry is, before I get to what Mzansi does and where we are, the industry started before 2013, but 2013 was the massive milestone, was the unveiling of the first cultivated beef burger, and that was in the Netherlands for $250,000. We've come a long way. In 2015, there was about 4 to 5 companies working on this. And in 2020 and now, there's over 100. And that's probably 25 doing B2C, so doing all kinds of things. They're doing beef, chicken, fish. They're also doing things like breast milk as well. So all through this cultivated process. And there's also B2B players that are giving us the supplies that we need to actually also reduce the cost and allow us to scale quicker and faster. And that's really, really exciting, that it really also showcases that there's a lot of opportunity for this space, and it also showcases that the technology has grown and developed tremendously since 2013. In terms of my journey into getting into cultivated meat, I just, as I said, got very excited about it, started reading a lot about it, and there's an organization called the Good Food Institute that puts out a lot of information about this, so if anyone's interested, they have amazing resources. I joined a webinar, and rather fortuitously, was looking to move into this space. I'd spoken to a lot of cultivated meat companies, but got connected to Brett and Mzansi. They were in their early phases of just having a name, but and kind of developed a brand, but really had already started thinking about what this would mean. And for me, it was just exciting to see other fellow South Africans who really wanted to also do this for South Africa and Africa. I think of the companies that I was talking about, we're the first in Africa to do it, and we're an overlooked market. People think that this doesn't exist here. People think that industrial agricultural farming doesn't exist here, but it does. And I think it's really important for us to be able to do it here. People want it. We've done some surveys that suggest that 52% of South Africans on a representative sample would eat cultivated meat if it was readily available, even at a higher price point. And I think it's about getting this to market to really, provide options for people who otherwise wouldn't have it. In terms of Mzansi, we are working on beef. The main reason we started doing that was a few reasons. We want to be a South African company, an African company, and that means looking at food, how it's cultural, dealing with issues like food security. And starting with beef was really important for us because it was something that we could, most people could relate to. We're going to start with products like burgers and sausages that can go in a braai and shish and yama, and products that will resonate with the average person. And thereafter, we will look at other species as well as other products that we will want to take to the average African market. There's a huge protein gap that we also want to work on, and once we're able to scale and get the cost down, we really want to tackle that as a South African and African company. It's very, very important to us. We've been able to do amazing things thus far. So we've cultivated fat and muscle, and last week we made our first and second beef meatball, and next week or in a week or so, we're going to unveil Africa's first cultivated beef burger. So we're on the up. Our production is going up, and hopefully soon people will get to try this. Thank you.